They said, you haven't even graduated from high school. What are you going to become? When I was 16, I was homeless. They laughed. At the age of 30, I became the owner of a building where floors were washed. They cried, saying, please, don't fire us. We didn't know that you would become someone. At 16, I was sleeping on buses, eating out of trash cans, and dreaming of at least some kind of job. And then I became their boss. But before I could even think of that, I had to survive. I remember the first night I spent on the streets like it was yesterday. It was winter, and the cold bit into my skin like 1,000 needles. The streets were filled with strangers rushing from one place to another. And there I was, just a kid, lost in the crowd, with nothing but the clothes on my back. My stepfather had kicked me out after the divorce. I'd stayed at home as long as I could, watching my parents' marriage fall apart. There was nothing left for me to do. I could hear my mother's voice in my head. Get out, you're not welcome here anymore. It stung, not just because she had abandoned me, but because I knew deep down that she was afraid to stand up for me. It was easier for her to let me go, easier for her to stay with him, to protect her new life. And me, I was an inconvenience. I hadn't even known where to go at first. There were no other family members who would take me in. I was a burden, remember? That's what they told me. My cousin laughed when I asked if I could crash at his place. You think we can afford that? You're on your own, man. My aunt, who lived in the city, told me I'd be fine on my own, and hung up before I could even argue. So I wandered. My first stop was the bus station. It was warm inside, a temporary escape from the biting cold, and I spent the night curled up on a bench, my legs tucked beneath me, trying not to be noticed. I remember the sound of the trains pulling into the station, their rhythmic clattering a strange comfort. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I shut my eyes, I could hear the faint sound of people laughing in the distance, as if they knew exactly what had happened to me. The next morning, I walked aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do. My stomach growled, and I had nothing. No money, no food, nothing. The idea of asking someone for help was laughable. What would they do? Would they throw me a few coins? Would they even care? Probably not. I had learned one thing in those first few days. People didn't care about someone like me. People only care about themselves. It was the first time I had to dig through a trash can for food. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't pretty. But hunger doesn't care about your pride. You do what you have to do to survive. I found some leftover pizza crusts, barely worth anything, but it was food. I ate it quickly, my hands shaking, not because I was cold, but because I couldn't believe I had fallen so far. By the end of that first week, I had learned to navigate the streets. I had found places where I could sleep. Bus stations, train platforms, abandoned buildings. Some nights I was lucky enough to find a discarded blanket or a coat someone had left behind. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the day, I tried to find work. I went from place to place, begging for even the smallest job, a part-time gig at a fast food restaurant, a few hours cleaning floors at a local store. Anything to make some money, even if it wasn't enough to get me off the streets. But the people I worked for, they didn't care about me. I wasn't a person to them. I was just a pair of hands they could use, nothing more. No one asked about my story. No one asked how I ended up there. The few friends I had from school, well, they were long gone. I tried reaching out to them, hoping maybe they'd let me crash on their couches, but they'd all either moved on or turned their backs. I wasn't the cool guy I had been just a year ago. I wasn't the one they wanted to hang out with anymore, and I couldn't blame them. One day while I was cleaning a table at a fast food joint, one of the regulars came in, a guy I had gone to school with, his face now more chiseled than I remembered. His name was Alex. He recognized me, but instead of asking what had happened, he laughed. He laughed like I was some kind of joke. "You're still doing this, huh? You're really stuck, huh?" he said, the smirk on his face making my skin crawl. I wanted to fight back, to say something, but I didn't have the energy. What would it have done? Nothing. He wasn't going to care about me. He wasn't going to help me. I was just another loser to him, another thing to laugh at. I was humiliated, but it only fueled the fire inside me. That night I looked up at the stars as I lay on my makeshift bed. a bench outside an all-night diner. For the first time in a long time, I felt something else. Anger. But not the kind of anger that makes you act out. It was a quiet, seething anger. The kind that makes you promise to yourself that no matter what, no one would ever laugh at you again. No one would ever see you as weak again. I wasn't going to be a joke. Not anymore. I didn't know how I was going to get out of this life. I didn't know what the future held. But I promised myself that I would make it. Somehow, some way, I would rise above it all. But that was just the beginning. Little did I know, the first step toward getting out of this mess was about to come in a way I never could have imagined. The months that followed felt like a blur. There were days when I thought I might finally break. Days when the exhaustion weighed on me so heavily, I thought I might collapse right there on the pavement. But I didn't. I kept going, one step after another, because what else could I do? Giving up was never an option. Not then, not ever. I had to survive. I kept taking whatever odd jobs I could find. Anything to keep me moving. Most of it was grueling work. I spent my mornings loading boxes into trucks, my afternoons cleaning floors, and my nights washing dishes at a greasy diner. The pay was pitiful, but it didn't matter. It was food and it was shelter. Sometimes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. And it was the only thing keeping me from being swallowed whole by the city. I learned early on that people who lived in the streets had their own rules. You had to be tough, never show weakness, never let anyone see you struggle. If you did, you'd be taken advantage of. I had my share of close calls. One time, a guy tried to steal my coat while I was sleeping on a bench. I woke up just in time, ready to fight for it, but he backed off when he saw the fire in my eyes. I wasn't going to be a victim, not again. But the thing that really kept me going wasn't the work or the fight for survival. It was a single thought, one that kept running through my mind every day as I walked the streets, as I busted my ass at whatever job I could get. I would make something of myself. It became my mantra. Whenever I felt like the world was closing in on me, whenever I thought I couldn't go on, I would whisper to myself, I will make something of myself. I will rise above this. And so, I did what I had to do to get there. I started picking up small skills, learning whatever I could. I'd watch the cooks at the diner and learn how to flip burgers perfectly, how to keep the kitchen running smoothly. I would listen to the truck drivers as they talked about logistics and managing a business. I'd even take notes on the side, scribbling in a small notebook I'd found in a dumpster. I knew that all of it, every little thing, was building towards something greater. One night, while I was sitting at the bus stop, exhausted and hungry, I had a moment of clarity. I realized that I didn't want to work for other people forever. I didn't want to be someone's employee. I didn't want to be stuck in a cycle of scraping by, always living hand to mouth. I wanted more. And that's when it hit me. I could start my own business. I didn't have much, just a few $100s I'd saved up, mostly from tips and side gigs. But it was enough to buy the basics. So I did. I used that money to buy some cheap equipment, started offering services to people I met along the way, cleaning houses, doing odd jobs, whatever they needed. Slowly, I built up a small customer base. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I was working for myself, not anyone else. That was the beginning, my first taste of independence. But just because I started working for myself didn't mean the struggles went away. It was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done. There were days when I didn't know how I was going to pay for my next meal. There were weeks when I was just barely getting by. But I kept going, and eventually the small jobs started to add up. I built a network of clients, took on bigger contracts, expanded my services. Over time, I found more and more work, more people willing to pay for what I could offer. I was still working from the ground up, but I had a sense of purpose now. I had a goal. I knew what I wanted, and I wasn't going to stop until I had it. But success didn't come overnight. It took years, years of relentless work, failure, and setbacks. And as my business began to grow, so did the distance between me and the people who had once written me off. I started saving up, putting away every penny I could, even when I was barely scraping by. I rented a small office space, barely big enough for a desk and a few chairs, but it was mine. I started hiring employees, people who believed in what I was building. I expanded my business into new areas, bringing in new clients. Slowly but surely, I was building something real. By the time I turned 30, I had grown my business into something respectable, a company with employees, contracts, and a reputation. But the real turning point, the moment everything changed, came when I hired someone. It was an ordinary day when I received an application for an office position. Nothing special. But when I looked at the name on the form, my heart stopped. It was Alex, the guy from school who had laughed at me, the guy who had mocked me when I was at my lowest. And he wasn't alone. There were others too, people from my past, people who had turned their backs on me, a cousin, an aunt, and even a former teacher. All of them had come to me for a job. They didn't know what I had become. They didn't know that I was the one they were begging to hire them. I smiled to myself as I reviewed their resumes. They had no idea what was coming. The interview room felt smaller than it usually did that morning. It was as though the walls themselves were closing in, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The day had started like any other. I had my usual cup of coffee, reviewed the schedules, and prepared for a meeting with a new client. But then the emails came in, the ones I had been dreading, though I hadn't known it at the time. It was Alex, my old schoolmate, asking for an interview. Then there was Clara, my aunt who had turned her back on me after my parents kicked me out, claiming she had no room for another mouth to feed. And there was Mr. Jensen, my old teacher, the one who told me I would never amount to anything, that I was just another statistic waiting to be swept under the rug. I thought I was prepared for this moment, but I wasn't. I had built this company from the ground up, starting with nothing, learning from mistakes, and clawing my way out of that hellhole they had left me in. Yet here they were, standing in my office, all smiles, trying to act like they hadn't forgotten about the kid who used to sleep on buses and scavenge for food. It wasn't just awkward, it was downright surreal. The first to walk in was Alex. He had always been the charming one, the one who could sweet-talk his way into anything. Back then, he was the one everyone loved, the one who mocked me the most when I showed up at school with dirt on my clothes, the one who made cruel jokes about me in front of everyone. He stepped into the office with that same confident grin, the kind he used to wear when he was one of the popular kids. But now there was something different in his eyes. Desperation. It was hard to miss. "Hey, man, it's been a while," Alex said, extending his hand with that all-too-familiar charm. I stared at his hand for a second, the image of the arrogant, careless version of him flashing in my mind, and then I shook it. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice steady, my expression unreadable. "It has." I motioned for him to sit. "So, what brings you here?" Alex looked nervous now. He cleared his throat and adjusted his collar, which was slightly too tight for his comfort. He started talking about his experience in sales, his passion for business. But it was all surface-level stuff. Words designed to impress, but no real substance. It wasn't the Alex I had once known, the one who used to make fun of me and act like he had everything figured out. This was a man who had lost his way, who had been humbled by the years. "How can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying no emotion. He hesitated, then leaned forward. "Look, man, I'm in a tough spot. The last few years haven't been easy. I know things between us weren't great back in the day, but I've changed. I, I'm really trying to get back on track. Can you help me?" I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. His words sounded sincere, but I couldn't forget the smirk he had worn on his face when he told everyone I'd never make it out of the gutter. I couldn't forget how he had laughed when I asked for help back then, like I was some kind of joke. I nodded slowly. "We'll talk more about this in a second. I need to speak with the others." Alex shifted nervously in his seat, trying to hide the uncertainty in his eyes, but I could see it. He was scared. Scared of being rejected, of not being good enough. The door opened again, and Clara, my aunt, walked in. She had aged, of course, but the same haughty look was still there. The look that told me I was nothing to her, that I wasn't worth her time. "Ah, look who's the big shot now," Clara said with a tight smile. "Didn't expect this. To be honest, I thought you'd be one of those people who ended up, well, lost." Her words stung, but I was ready. I had expected this after all. I had heard about her failed attempts to keep her own business afloat, heard about how she was struggling financially, but I wasn't going to let it show. I see you've come for a job, too, I said, my voice steady. She looked at me, surprised by the coldness in my tone, but didn't back down. We've all been through a lot, right? I was hoping you might consider giving me a chance. Things haven't been easy for me either. I raised an eyebrow. Haven't been easy for you. You threw me out when I needed help most. You didn't even give me a chance. Why should I give you one? Clara flinched, the anger in her eyes flickering for a moment before she quickly hid it behind a mask of composure. That was years ago, and we all make mistakes. Yeah, I said softly. I guess we do. She didn't say anything else. The words hung in the air, suffocating, as I sat back in my chair and glanced over at Mr. Jensen, my former teacher. He had been the one to tell me I wouldn't make it, that I'd never amount to anything. He had been the one to laugh when I showed up at school looking like a homeless kid, my stomach growling from hunger. He had thought I was just another casualty of life. He had been wrong. Now he stood before me, shifting nervously in his worn-out suit, his eyes flickering between me and the other applicants. He cleared his throat. Mr. Jenkins, he started, his voice faltering, I just want to say I never meant to belittle you back then. I had no idea what you were going through. If I'd known, I would have tried to help. I didn't respond immediately. I just watched him, letting the silence settle between us, letting him feel the weight of all the years that had passed, all the time he had spent looking down on me. Then I said, you didn't know what I was going through, but you didn't care either. You thought I was just a lost cause. But look at me now. Look at what I've built. And look at where you are. His face flushed with shame. Please, he said, almost pleading, don't fire us. We didn't mean it. I sat back in my chair staring at them all. Each one of them had turned their back on me when I was nothing. They had laughed, mocked, and abandoned me. But now here they were, desperately asking for my help. I looked at them all, and for the first time in my life, I felt the power I had earned. It wasn't just a job I had built. It was a testament to my survival, to everything I had endured. I wonder, I said slowly, if you would take in a 16-year-old homeless kid now, would you help him? They didn't answer. The silence that filled the room was thick, suffocating. My words had landed with the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, and now they all sat there, looking at me with a mix of fear, regret, and shame. They had expected a second chance, a redemption of some sort. But redemption doesn't come easily. Not after years of turning your back on someone who only wanted to survive. I let the silence stretch on for a moment longer, watching them squirm in their seats. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about making them understand. Understanding that the people they had discarded were not weak, were not failures. They were warriors. They had risen from nothing, from the dirt and the brokenness, to become something more. Finally, I broke the silence. I didn't need your charity then, and I don't need it now, I said, leaning forward. I don't owe any of you anything, but you owe me, all of you, because I am here, not because of your pity, but because of my own will. Their eyes darted to the floor, to the walls, anywhere but at me. I'm not going to just hand you a job because you show up on my doorstep, I continued. You think a job is the answer to your problems? You think a paycheck can erase what you did? You don't even know what real work is, what it means to fight every day just to stay alive. I could feel the heat of the anger building inside me, and I didn't try to hold it back. You laughed at me when I was nothing. You watched as I slept on buses, scavenged for food. You mocked me, and now you want me to be the one who pulls you out of the hole you dug for yourselves? I shook my head slowly. You don't deserve my help. The words stung. They felt good to say. They felt like a release of everything I had kept bottled up for years. But even as the anger burned through me, a part of me felt something else, a kind of bitter satisfaction. I had spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy, trying to prove that I could make something of myself. And now here they were, asking me for a favor, when they had never done a single thing for me when I needed it most. For a moment, there was nothing but the heavy silence again. Then Alex, the first to speak, cleared his throat. I know we can't change the past, he said, his voice low and uncertain. But we've all made mistakes, and we're asking for a second chance, for a shot at redemption. I know we didn't help you, but we can't change that. All we can do now is ask for forgiveness. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something in me softened just a little. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice, or maybe it was the fact that he was finally taking responsibility for his actions. For once, it felt like he wasn't just trying to save face. "I'm not some charity case," I said quietly, the fire in my voice fading slightly. "But I get it. You're desperate. You've fallen as far as I did. Maybe, maybe that's worth something, but you're going to have to prove it. All of you. If you want to work here, you're going to earn it. You'll have to show me you've changed, that you're not just looking for a handout. And believe me, I'll be watching." They all nodded, their expressions serious, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. It was a look I had seen many times before, a look I had worn myself when I was out there on the streets, praying for someone to give me a chance. "I'm not going to forget what you did," I added, my voice soft but firm. "But I'm willing to give you a shot. Don't waste it." And just like that, the room shifted. The tension lightened, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had to prove they were worthy of my trust, worthy of a second chance. Alex stood first, extending his hand. "Thanks," he said, his voice steady now. "We won't let you down." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. Then they all stood, and for the first time, they walked out of my office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared out the window, watching the traffic flow below, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. It wasn't just about giving them a second chance. It was about proving to myself that I had control over my own life, that I was no longer the scared 16-year-old begging for help. I had made it. I was the one in charge now. But as much as I wanted to revel in that feeling, I couldn't shake the sense of emptiness that lingered. Yes, they were here, asking for my help. But was it enough? Was it enough to erase the years of pain and neglect? I didn't have the answers, not yet. But I knew this. The road to forgiveness was long, and for some people, it might be too late. They might never truly understand what it took for me to get here. They might never understand what it meant to be that homeless 16-year-old. But they had one thing going for them. They were willing to try. That was something, at least. I wasn't sure if it was enough, but I was willing to give them the chance to prove it. For now, that would have to be enough.